this lecture. It's a great group, and I'm going to talk one-on-one with you, my brothers and sisters in alchemy. And you've all done a lot of alchemy work with Jeff, and so you're familiar with the basic principles, I think. And we're going to try to go just a little deeper and talk about how to do alchemy on different levels, and how to make it an effective force in our lives. This drawing is a drawing of a puffer, and that's the first thing we need to get out of the way. This drawing by Ostate is pretty famous. It shows an alchemist at his furnace with a bellows, and they were called puffers because they furiously bellowed their fires. They thought that they could transform anything by getting a hot enough fire. This is the full drawing, and this is really an unusual drawing in that it just has a horizontal axis. And when you look at chemical drawings, the first thing you want to do is draw a target. It's about the above and the below. So there's a vertical axis of reality, or painters follow, and there's a horizontal axis. And that horizontal axis is our everyday reality, left and right, masculine and feminine. And the vertical axis is the anima mundi, or the spiritual axis between the above and the below. In this drawing, it's scary in that there is virtually no vertical axis here. It's projecting out on the horizontal plane in kind of a rude way. And it shows the mentality of a puffer. The puffer is concerned with physical and wealth, physical possessions and wealth, and he's using fire. In other words, he's going to the fastest way of doing it, which is dangerous in alchemy. I think of the puffer as kind of a corporate executive, you know. That he's got the same mentality that you see in corporations. And he's abandoned the water work, or the work with feelings, and he's working with fire, which is thoughts. So it's all about thoughts and building things with thoughts. Thoughts in alchemy are things. And the alchemists believe that thoughts pile up and get in the way, and every once in a while you have to have this fire and burn them up and get them out of the way. They thought that the salt in tears was the breakdown from the breakdown of thoughts and emotions when you cried. They thought their thoughts were actually physically manifesting as salt in tears. And they made tinctures from that. So this is a still life over here, basically abandoned work, and he's focusing just on the materialistic goals. Here you see his wife wiping the butt of a baby here, and it's pretty much abandoned, pushed into the back of his life. So family life and that kind of orientation is abandoned by the puffer. There's some thought, I saw a paper once that says that this is actually, this kind of a shadowy figure up here is actually a retort. And in that interpretation, in that paper, when we reject something, when we reject our emotions or the water work, it gives it energy, and it comes back to us through our unconscious. And this retort of water is ready to collapse on this guy, and things fall apart that way. So you actually create unconscious or subconscious entities or spirits in alchemy by putting energy into anything. You reject something and you're giving it energy, and you're creating it. Energy becomes matter. In this drawing by Rembrandt, called The Alchemist or the Philosopher, we see a whole different orientation. Rembrandt was such a master of light, and that basically this is a portrait in light. The vertical axis is very obvious here. This is the what's called the Alchemy, the Scala Meditationis, or the stairway of transformation, the stairway of meditation. And it's a spiral staircase, and that it leads through different aspects and different views of the situation. Very significant here is that the darkness and the light are both shown here. So the meditation is in the darkness, and the meditation is in the light. So, and that's a key thing that separates alchemy from other disciplines, especially other spiritual disciplines and religion, because the alchemists work with the darkness. It's not rejected. And that's hard to get across to modern people. Psychologists recognize it. In other words, depression and dark states, when you're down, are workable things in alchemy. They're not things to take medication for. They're opportunities, because when you're depressed, you're defaulted. You don't care about material possessions. You don't care about things that you've been putting your energy into before. So the depression is really something to take advantage of in alchemy. I realize there are serious depressions that are symptoms of physical diseases, but for the most part, and certainly in this country, depression is an opportunity we're missing. Because the work, most of the work in the light is about getting to that state where you're free of things. You know? So they actually work with meditation and on both the light and the dark. And the horizontal plane here, we see a more balanced aspect compared to the puffer. The philosopher has turned away from his books and now is in contemplation. So this is a stage beyond books. There's a time in alchemy where you burn up the books and you tear up the books and you abandon them, because the work is now interior, totally. And there's pictures of people, alchemists, tearing up books and burning them because they've reached this stage. And on this side, horizontal axis, it's male and female, which is typical for the horizontal axis. We have here the Sora Mystica, or the mystical sister of the alchemist. And she's doing the practical work in the lab, also the essential work, but she's slightly in the darkness here because that's part, without prejudice, saying that's part of the feminine role, the passive role, is to be out of the limelight. But believe me, every alchemist had a Sora Mystica, had a female accomplice or assistant in the laboratory.
Is this kind of an example of Aura and Labora, where she's like doing the work and he's doing the
That's exactly what it is. It's Aura and Labora, meditation or prayer and the actual practical work. So it's on the horizontal axis, it's Aura et Labora, prayer and work. And all the alchemists had, all of them had a female counterpart who did not really publicize their participation, but we know from private notebooks and things that they always had a Sora Mystica. Even Isaac Newton had a Sora Mystica, and it's a big scandal, but every alchemist has to have one. Whether it's inside him, perhaps it's an aspect of his personality, the feminine side that he's working with, or it's a real person. But that feminine has to be there to do the work. And we'll talk about this drawing more. Again, we mentioned yesterday that I went to Vienna to study with Kurt Godel, and he was a fascinating man. He'd opened a school at the University of Vienna, and I'd gone there to study in that school. What he did is remarkable, and it hasn't filtered down into the general knowledge yet. It hasn't filtered down into the world. There's a few books about it, but this man really changed our view of what is real. And he did it mathematically with three theorems. His basic statement was that any axiomatic logical system, such as arithmetic, cannot be both consistent and complete, because there will always be statements that are true but not provable with any formal theory. Okay, that's the end of the math for today. What it's saying is that no matter what we do to try and understand reality, there's always going to be something true but not provable, and that our whole system of arithmetic, logic, computer programming, anything that is an axiomatic system based on axioms will fail because it's incomplete and inconsistent within itself. He proved that by using statements like this statement is false. This statement is false. That's a tautology in mathematics, and it will fry any computer. It's the kind of question that Captain Kirk used to ask to the computer to burn up. Because it just goes round and round in circles. This statement is false. If it's false, then it's true. But if it's true, then it's false. And you get into that endless cycle of, and that's a tautology. It goes nowhere in mathematics. He used a lot of those examples, but he also did something really creative in mathematics. He invented a kind of metamathematics, a metaphysical mathematics that looked at all the propositions and different aspects of logic and mathematics and assigned it its own number or its own special symbol. And working with those, he was able to prove that there is something, always something outside. Let me give an example. Like, draw a circle around anything. Draw a circle around this chair. To understand that chair completely, you always have to leave the circle of that chair to understand it. You know, who built the chair? Where did it come from? What materials is it made of? Where did that cushion come from? That depression in the cushion come from? You have to go outside that circle to explain it, to understand it fully. Now draw a circle around the whole universe. The same thing is true. It holds on every level. You cannot understand the universe without going outside the universe. That proves in a very simple way that there exists a mind, or what we might call God, but what Godel actually called the one mind. He said there is one mind in the universe that is the source of our creation, the source of our universe, and that we can never understand it. That's the other thing. Logically, we can never we can never approach God. We can never understand God. And Godel did this formula. He did it in such a way, well, that's a good story. There was a mathematical conference in Göttingen, Germany, where all the mathematicians from around the world were coming together for one grand exposition stating that mathematics was a supreme science and that we would understand all reality through axiomatic systems. So people like David Hilbert, German mathematician, Bertrand Russell, Ludwig Wittgenstein, they're all working on this perfect axiomatic system of logic. And they wanted to beat the other one to get there. And that would mean, well, Hilbert went at the conference, he got up and he said, I'll give it to you in German. Wir müssen werden und wir werden wissen, which means we must know everything and we will know everything. In fact, he called it on the counter when he said it, like a good German. And that meant that there was such an arrogance at the time of mathematicians that math would lead us, math and logic would lead us to truth, and that was a total rejection of all the intuitive sciences. And but sitting in the audience was Godel. And less than a year later, he tore down that whole system, completely fell. Wittgenstein lost his mind. He came back and finally said that math is just a game, that no mathematical proposition is real, and so he kind of reacted the other way. Bertrand Russell abandoned his project. David Hilbert died, and his epitaph was that we must know everything and we will know everything. It's on his gravestone. And that's how it ended, right on his gravestone. Who knows? Godel and Albert Einstein at the Institute for Advanced Study, they were BFFs. They were, they hit it off. Einstein said that Godel was the most fantastic mind he'd ever encountered in his life. And they had these long walks where they discussed different things, and Godel would review Einstein's work, and they talked together. I wish I could have been a pro or something just to listen to some of those conversations. These are the student IDs of Godel and I from the University of Vienna. Not that I'm comparing myself to this great genius. In fact, I want to show some similarities, but also major differences here. Godel, as a young man, and also me as a young man, was very dedicated to finding truth, big capital T, and also mathematics. We both believed that was the right way to find it, and logic, and that. So we were pouring all our energies into that, and we lived our lives like monks, basically. Both of us, social life. It was that time of learning, deep learning. It was a great time until I read Godel's proof later on. But Godel was different from me in that he had this. I wouldn't call Godel a great mathematician. I would call him a great inconsistency finder, a great person to know when something doesn't add up. He had an amazing sense of when when something didn't add up. In fact, for instance, when he went to get his U.S. citizenship before the judge. Some of his pals from the Institute for Advanced Study went with him. And the judge was questioning him, and he passed all the questions. He was fine for citizenship. But then the judge asked for his comments, and Godel said, well, I found some inconsistencies in the U.S. Constitution which will allow a dictator to take control of the country. Well, he found all these inconsistencies. So the judge right away said, no, I don't want to hear it, because he was putting himself into jeopardy. So his friends, quickly got him out of the courthouse. And he was like that. He just was constantly looking for inconsistencies, or maybe it was an obsessive disorder of some type. But he was a genius in that way, and he was able to apply it to mathematics. So it was like he was born that way to do what he did, I think. I've got a little algorithm here, an aging program. Aging, there it is. This is how Godel aged over the years, and keep your eye on the glasses.
Looks like Harry Potter.
Computers are inconsistent.
I like to threaten them with my hammer, but it doesn't work.
I usually kick it. I'll do this manually.
Or I say cooperate.
Just pound your fist.
I'll be darned. Sorry.
Oh, there it is.
There
Wow.
Yeah.
You got it.
Sorry. That's
Well, you stayed so young.
I think maybe I'd take some.
Yeah, and you'll notice his hair aged funny too. On the right side of the brain, which is a creative, the logical. The left side of his brain stayed young and dark, which is the logical part, and the right side aged, which is that emotional. And that was natural. It was like that. Now, this is how I would have looked, I think, if I would have continued in pure mathematics. I would have went crazy, it really would have.
We like it better this way.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people went this way in mathematics, This is a drawing when I went to the library and decided to change over to alchemy. I discovered, and it's one of the most important ones, I thought, that really made a difference in changing me. It's from Daniel Maliev's medical chemical book, and painted by Marion. This is a copy that I restored in color just to make it easier to follow here. But it summarizes all the Hermetic philosophy, and also summarizes a lot of Godel's work. We see here a real division between the above and below. That's the first thing we notice. This is the area above of energy, archetypes. We see these archetypes and the three principles of sulfur, mercury, and salt expresses Father, Son, Holy Ghost here, to get by the Christian censors, I think. And the below, which again is divided on this horizontal axis between left and right. This is the duality. There's no duality above here, but below it's divided into that masculine aggressive side and the feminine passive side, light and dark, if you will. And this is the struggle that we need to heal on a conscious level in order to become alchemists, to become this central figure here, who is the androgynous alchemist, uniting the black and white and the dark, the light within himself, standing on the vitriolic lines, which now have one head. The feminine way, tied to nature, tied to the cosmos, tied to the powers of nature, the lunar powers, and growth, and healing, and nurturing, and the elements here are water and earth. And the masculine energy, tied to the creative world, construction and building things and controlling nature, with the lying assisting him, that type of energy. The elements here are fire and air. And you see both these sides are chained to the cloud, what they call the clouds of unknowing, chained to that and unable to perceive that upper reality that determines our reality, of the one mind. So you can't as a female consciousness determine or enter this area, and you can't as a male consciousness. It has to come together as a female-male consciousness, or what the Egyptians called intelligence of the heart, or that balance which Jung would call intuition, the balance between intellect and feeling, sensation. It's a process that is at the core of all Hermetic teachings. Now the alchemist here is able to enter into this realm above and understand it. And the first thing, there's no clouds here, the first thing he encounters are the canopy of the stars, which are the higher principles or entering into the spiritual realm. And these are birds of alchemy that symbolize the different operations in alchemy that have to be done. The crow of calcination, the goose of dissolution, and the cock of conjunction, the pelican of distillation, and the phoenix of coagulation, the 5 primary operations and the 5 primary planets of alchemy, from Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, and Mercury. And this is the stone, this is actually, we have the horizontal and vertical axis, but this axis actually is projecting out this way. So we have a third axis in this drawing, which is also another thing to look for in alchemical drawings, that third axis, which is like a mandala. It's a principle in the mandala. And it's where you focus your attention in meditation to try to bring all these together in one vision, one unitary vision that conveys wisdom. It's hard to try to think about these many individual principles and not see them as one cohesive whole, and that's when it becomes a real tool. So there's different layers here, 7 layers of meditation, and we're definitely talking about meditation on this level, where you need to peel away like the skin of an onion to reach the inner essence of consciousness, which is here portrayed as Mercury, actually the Mercury monad, which we'll talk about later too, which is the stone in alchemy. Now the most important thing here, most people miss when they study this drawing, and that is that there are 2 suns here. There's a sun behind the sun, or sometimes called the black sun or the hidden sun. That is the one mind in alchemy. That is the unknowable presence behind our universe, outside our universe, that created it, or at least understands it. And this is called, like in alchemy and Hermetics, mind maker. So it's like the one mind projected information into the Big Bang through light, and what took it over and made it real was mind the maker, which is nature. And so it's almost like a matrix going on in our universe, unfolding the mission of the one mind. It's almost like it's archetypal, and that's why the archetypes unfold. So we know nothing about what the meaning of the mission was. I mean, was it probably to perfect matter, to spiritize matter. But we don't know that because we know nothing about the one mind. But we can know this part. We can know nature. We can contact these, merge with these archetypes and understand the principles here of this matrix behind our reality.
How is the one mind and the one thing different?
The one mind is energy. You look at it that way. The one mind is information in energy, and it has the characteristics of a mind. The one thing has the characteristics of a body or matter. So the one thing here is the created world, and it's actually, the one thing manifests as material things, but it originated as what's called the first matter. And the first matter was something on the borderline between matter and energy. It's that instant, we know that matter and energy are equivalent and change back and forth into each other. And that's the instant when they're changing, when they're completely balanced. So if you get a hold of a hunk of first matter, it can become anything through your conscious projecting on it. And in alchemy, your souls, your own souls are the first matter of your being. So that's why we work to get in touch with that. The first matter is the key to alchemy. There's no doubt. Key to the work. I mean, the philosophy is here, but the key to the actual work is getting the first matter, getting in contact with your own soul or whatever you're talking about.
What is that? What are the birds again?
The birds are the operations of alchemy. So we have the crow, which is the bird of calcination, the first operation. It's associated with Saturn, so it's getting rid of that lead in the operation. It's trying to progress from lead to the next level. And
It's the dark but necessary stage, the Negretto.
absolutely, it's the beginning of the Negretto of the black phase.
And the space between the two suns, the second one is sort of a new thing for me. So I've always seen this space between the knowable, like on the other side of the veil, and the unknowable, which is outside of that.
This would be,
circle.
yeah, the unknown.
And so, what is that? What do they talk about? That second, the space between that sun that's unknowable and
This space,
that space. Yeah. What is that relationship?
it's inaccessible. It's that. In other words, we have our universe where we can function, where we can actually know things, and we have what's outside our universe, totally outside our universe, that determines it. And that, whatever it was, whatever it is, we have no way of knowing what it is. And that is what projected our whole universe into being with the Big Bang, or in the alchemical prints too. It's the same thing. We see the idea that there's this sun behind the sun, the dark sun, that is projecting into, this is the first matter, the cauldron of matter, some type of change, the alpha and omega, everything through fiat lux, created by light. And that's what's determining our and this is an ancient philosophy from Egypt that's being confirmed every day in science.
So I get to add another whole layer of unknowable.
Don't think of that separation too literally, because there's no space.
Right.
It's
There's no
not-
space.
In fact, Godel proved that in what was called the, Theorem 3, I call it. But anyway, he proved that mind is not isolated in our mind, in our brains, that mind is everywhere. And that it's not a static thing. And that the one mind is connected to that, but not through any immediate means.
Nothing we can access.
Nothing we can access. No powers of. But this pattern is in us too. This pattern is repeated in everything. So there's a one mind in us that we can access because it's within us. And that's what meditation's about. You access that one mind, you project into the matrix, the nature, the biology of your own body, and you can change it. And that's what the alchemists believe. So this pattern, that's different. The pattern's in all of us. But the mind, one mind is everywhere. And it's not isolated. And these are all drawings of this moment of creation and the Big Bang into the duality of light and darkness. And you see hundreds of these drawings in alchemical works. And basically it's describing this process, which is the Big Bang, which took place 14 billion years ago from a singularity, what we call a singularity, where something burst, where light burst into emptiness, nothing, and had this information that keeps spreading. Our universe keeps expanding with the same information. In other words, nothing has changed from the Big Bang, not a thing, despite all the things that we've gone through and all the different layers of the universe. The picture that was projected is exactly the same for every stage. It's called the egalitarian principle, and it means that any part of the universe is the same as the original. The spacing, the energy, the total components of that area of space are true to the original image of what it was supposed to be. And it also means that there's a connection between light, because light is carrying this information into matter. It's a universal equation, E equals mc squared. Energy and matter are equivalent and come back and forth, change into each other through the media area of light. In fact, if that equation, if the little c in that equation stood for consciousness instead of the speed of light, then that would be an alchemical equation. You know, the alchemists would have no problem with that. And this burst into reality, there's another amazing thing about it. It always adds up to zero. There's nothing here, mathematically, in physics, because the singularity, if you weigh the universe, and they have, mathematically, it weighs the total mass energy, and that means energy and mass converted into each other. It weighs 10 to the 53rd power, which is a huge, huge number. That's the weight of everything that's been created in the universe. And they recently, with just the last couple of years, they've determined the weight, if you will, of gravity, the force of gravity. And with no connection between the equations, they determined that the weight or the influence of gravity is 10 to the minus 53rd power. They completely cancel each other out. In other words, there's nothing there. The bottom line is that the universe sums up to zero. I mean, what a perfect way to create something out of nothing. You know, it's amazing. And there's other things here.
And nothing out of something.
Nothing. It just adds up to nothing. There's and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but there's another thing here that adds up to zero, which is amazing. There's different stages here. When light came from the singularity, it changed into, after about 60,000 years, it started changing into matter. And what occurred was what they call the neutrino phase. And the neutrinos are kind of something between light and matter. They're almost impossible to detect. I mean, right now there's billions and billions of neutrinos going through this room, passing through all of us. And there's a lot of work recently to detect them by building detectors, thousands of feet underground. Hopefully they'll catch one, but they figure it might be 1,000 years before they catch one, because they're that rare. But when neutrinos were created, that's when the duality occurred. So from the light came a duality, and there were antimatter neutrinos and there were matter neutrinos. And that's where the duality of our existence came from, right here on this expansion of the universe. So you had this duality, and it would have summed up to nothing eventually. It would have come back together from nothing, except for one totally unexplainable fact in physics and astronomy. For some reason, there was one extra neutrino for every 100 billion particles at the beginning. It wasn't a perfect balance. And they call the neutrino the God particle because it seems an act of intent, and a totally unexplainable act, that there was one tiny extra neutrino for every 100 billion particles, and when the bang, when antimatter and matter combined, it was the most unbelievable explosion in the universe. But what was left over was what became us. We are that. If that extra neutrino hadn't been there, the universe would have destroyed at this point, and it wouldn't have expanded. So there's intent there, and again, the universe would have added up to zero at that point. So the first matter is the key, and we'll focus on that for a while. The first matter is often depicted as a dragon because it's uncontrollable, and there's a lot of fear associated with dealing with the first matter, especially on a personal basis from the unconscious. Our unconscious is like this dragon where we put a lot of energy to stored secrets and things that we don't want people to know, things that we don't want ourselves to know. So it's, I love this quote. I am a poisonous dragon, present everywhere, to be had from nothing. I am both male and female, and carry the powers of both heaven and earth. I am the egg of nature. I spring from the earth and descend from heaven. I am the carbuncle of the sun. Yet I am most noble when purified and produce a substance by which you may perfect anything. And that sums it up pretty good. Huh?
What is a carbuncle?
Carbuncle is like a pimple. It's like the defect on the sun.
Okay.
It's a big pimple. Now this is the first matter. Again, another depiction of the first matter. It's always associated with darkness. But there's always, the archetypes are hidden in the first matter too. And that's where the energy is that the alchemist wants to connect with. And that's what we want to connect with in meditation too, because the archetypes and all the stuff you're doing with the gods and the mask, and all that work, you're connecting with the archetypes, the archetypal energies, which are facets of the first matter that are in creation. The archetypes you can work with because different archetypes are associated with different energies. You know, the energies, fear, or fire, or transformation. They're all different archetypes that we can access. And Campbell and Jung knew about that, and they wrote about it.
And these are astrological over here, looks like, isn't it?
Yeah, these are astrological archetypes, which are shown. They come down into each of us, and they determine our personality to a large extent. So the first step really is to get in touch with our own personal archetype and transform it, because a lot of times these aren't good things. I mean, these are how we're salted in a lot of ways. You know, a lot of our negative characteristics are determined by the planets and the stars, and that's something we have to overcome. It's kind of like karma, the idea of karma, and that's how they approached it.
So when you meditate, this is where you're trying to go to?
In some meditations, yeah.
And then what happens when you reach that state?
And usually these are expressed in images, or like in dreaming. The dreams you had last night, if you think about what type of image was shown up, it's easy to connect it with an archetype usually, through the type of tools in myth that the archetype used or the god used, through the behavior of the archetype. Like Saturn is the archetype of lethargy and stubbornness and unwanting to change. And Jupiter is the expansive archetype of sociability and phoniness in the public. Also sexual abuse, you know. And Mars, of course, is the anger and war archetype. So it's easy if you know your myths and you know what you feel behind the mask. I wouldn't say easy, but it takes some work, and that's what the alchemists do. Now, alchemists uniformly believe that the first matter is not only something metaphysical, but it's also something real. And all the experiments in alchemy, most of them are aimed at isolating the first matter and trying to get it out of a plant to make the vegetable stone, or different the mineral stone. That's what is the essence of all the stones, including the phosphorus stone. When I was in Vienna, I took my apprenticeship with Miros Favilla, an Italian living in Prague, and we actually went out on journeys to collect the first matter. I mean, he took me the first year I was there. He took me to the Black Forest in Germany, southern Germany, and the Black Forest is known for its first matter, the black soil. In fact, the word alchemy means from the black earth of Egypt, from the Delta. So alchemists in the school I was taught in believed that the black dirt, the rich black dirt, contained the first matter, and it could be isolated. So, but I was new to that, and I thought that was a crazy idea, traipsing around through the Black Forest with all these gunny sacks and shovel, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here, following this madman? but sure enough, he pointed to a kind of a depression in the ground, and he said, dig here. And I started digging. I got a gunny sack, started digging through the dirt, and it was crusty on top, but as soon as I got the top layer off, it was really strong smelling, and I started choking, and I never smelled dirt so strong. And the dirt got loose then, and I started digging with my hands, and just putting it into the gunny sack, and all of a sudden I felt a root or something wrap around my hand. I felt it move, like something moved on me. So I pull my hand out, and I throw back, and there's this snake wrapping around through my fingers. And I yell out, "Maris!" And he'd come up behind me, he says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "There's a snake." And he says, "It's a worm." He said, "It's a worm." And it is. It was a worm. There's a giant earthworm that grows in that black soil. It's called the regan worm, and it only grows in the Black Forest. It's like 18 to 20 inches long.
Oh, gosh.
And it's amazing. The soil, I mean, this indicates there's something special about that soil. And the castings from this worm sell for like $100 a pound because they're really rich, and like roses, people who grow roses just...
Do you think there's any connection between that being like an asexual thing and,
That's a good point, yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
the hermaphrodite?
And it's
Yeah.
united in the soil. That's a good point, I
Mhm.
never thought about that, because the worm is asexual.
Oh, interesting.
Things grow in the Black Forest so dense, and that's why they call it the Black Forest, because you can't hardly see because the trees grow so close together. It's an amazing place. And so anyway, we ended up with 5 sacks of black dirt, no worms, and took it back. We ended up, he added some really nasty stuff to it to get it rotting and then fermenting, and went on for about 6 or 7 months. We distilled it and then coagulated out of that about just a test tube of something he called gur, which was a clear, thick liquid, and he would never give me any of that. But I've made my own gur since, and it's the essence of dirt. It's the essence, the first matter in alchemy. We consider that the first matter of dirt, and we add that to like the tinctures and different preparations, elixirs, as an ingredient. So the first matter is an ingredient in alchemy. Alchemists are obsessed with the first matter, and we look for it in dew. We look for it in any kind of secretion, because the secretions are like distilling things. So you want to get it when it's already distilled. So dew is a good thing to connect it from. And they use rain too, and different, like the sweat of metals. If you put a metal in, it sweats. That's really special stuff. You want to save the sweat from metals. Not aluminum cans, but
What do you mean to sweat, like when it heats up and the
It
blood
heats
comes out?
There's usually an iridescent oil that'll come out when the metal sweats. It's where the spreading of the peacock's tail comes from. That the peacock is now releasing its essence, and that iridescent oil that forms on a metal. You have to do it in an enclosed furnace, a reverberatory furnace, and you can get them to sweat quite a bit. The sweat of lead, is used for stuff, and the sweat of, there's no sweat from gold. It doesn't sweat.
One of the symbols that we use at the alchemical fire circle is that what we call the furnace, where the drummers are. That's the reverberatory furnace that makes our metals sweat, so we show our colors.
Exactly. That's
So we're using the same metaphors here, just as we're the material, we're the prima materia.
Absolutely. In a laboratory, when you're running the reverberatory furnace, it goes boom, 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 just like you, John. This is Henrik Brandt, who's famous alchemist, Dutch alchemist, and he collected the first matter from the urine of young boys. He had them go up to his washroom and piss in his bathtub, and he collected like hundreds of gallons of fresh urine from boys, and he distilled it. I mean, he'd be on some kind of list today, that's for sure. And he distilled it, and the final product glowed just like the first matter was said to have glowed when you isolate it. It gave off light, and he actually accumulated it for a long time in Europe. The first matter was thought to be contained in urine of young boys, and everybody started drinking the urine of young boys. It was actually sold, and that's where this whole therapy of urine therapy started. was with this man, because everybody believed he had found the first matter and that it would cure everything. Actually, what he'd done is isolate the phosphorus in urine, and phosphorus glows with this color. And so he discovered phosphorus